the rumors around Benjamin Netanyahu, and it seems that recently he's not participating in the security
Mm.
briefings in Israel. And then we
Yes.
had 2 or 3 videos of him, and mostly people are talking about these are AI generated videos,
Yes.
they're not real. What is your understanding of the situation around Benjamin Netanyahu?
It's very important. Speaking from a Russian point of view, when an individual like Mikhail Gorbachev is subject to detention, to arrest, and there's a putsch going on in the capital, the first thing you do is to make sure that he's still alive. And you do that by telephone, among other things. That was a long time ago when the putsch was attempted against Gorbachev, to verify that he was alive and talking first. Second, with respect to Netanyahu, there have been 3 video clips he intended to show he's alive. The first was the so-called 6-finger video, where he makes a speech, and the AI analysis shows that there are all sorts of manipulations. That because that failed to be convincing, either that he was alive or in command, and we'll come back to the difference between those 2 things in a minute, because they're strategically significant. He did the coffee cup video. The coffee cup and coffee shop video has been analyzed. I've seen it. Lots of millions of people have now seen it. You've seen it. It shows several AI fabrications. And speaking from a Russian point of view, we're used to fabrications. Yeltsin's speeches were often fabricated with cuts. You could see the cuts. And in this particular case, you can see cuts. First, when he drinks from the coffee cup, you see that he doesn't swallow. You can't drink coffee and not swallow it. And you see a cut in the clip between the moment he sips and the moment he swallows. It's a fabrication. Second, as many people have seen, the surface of the coffee and the design of the cappuccino don't change even after he's begun drinking from it. That's the second one, and it's suspect. The third one is, let's call it the girly video. That's where he goes to a site and begins talking to girls, to several women. You see a couple of bodyguards around him and so forth. Again, the object is to show he's alive. However, if you look carefully, you see he's wearing the very same jacket as he wore in the coffee shop video, which was screened a day before, more than 24 hours before. If you look at it very exactly.
John, do you want me to play it for you?
I don't know. I think everybody's sick of them. And I want to come to a bigger point. What you can see is the zipper on his jacket is in the same position as it was in the coffee shop a day later. Not possible. It's not normal. Now, what do these things show you? It may show you he's still alive. It definitely shows you that Netanyahu wants to show the world that he's alive. But what it doesn't show you, and that's the point you began with, he is no longer in command of Israel. Prime ministers don't show that they're in command of a war, let alone an economy. The normal prime ministerial operations, he's not showing. Why do you show a coffee cup and 2 girls when you are really in command? Now, what does it mean if he's alive but not in command? This is a very interesting problem, and Netanyahu's videos, whether they're AI fakes or not, show he's not in command. Therefore, the question arises, has there been or is there ongoing a form of putsch in Israel? This is a very serious development. And I can't add from what my Russian sources say because they're not those who know aren't talking, and there's more suspicion and guesswork than there's reality. But let's step back a minute and look at the strategic issue. Why would there be a putsch now against Netanyahu? Or why would he be afraid of one, and aims to show at this point he's walking around freely and therefore in command when he's not? Answer: in many respects, as your colleagues, my colleagues show, Israel is now defenseless, as Ted Postel explained on your program last week. It's unable to achieve its principal war aim against Iran. Let's say it's genocidal against Iran, but it also, in military terms, means that Israel's principal war aim is to prevent Iran ever having not only nuclear warheads, but conventional warheads on ballistic missiles with the precision that can destroy Israel. Ted Postel's data really convince me and should convince us all, without exaggeration, Iran's retaliatory capacity, something we've been talking about for months, is surviving. It survives to the extent that Israel loses its war aim. The US is different, and I disagree with those who think that Israel is running Trump, running this war. It's always the other way around, but it suits many administrations for election purposes and other purposes to make it appear that Israel comes first. And it's reasonable for Iranian foreign minister and others to deride the US policy as Israel first. But now what we have is a serious turning point in which the US is facing a longer war than it anticipated. Israel is facing a war that cannot end the existential threat that it faces from Iran. And in fact, it now faces a stronger threat than Israel has ever faced before. What's to do? Answer, we've talked about before. I've written about in Dances with Bears, and others are seeing it too. Israel will reach for tactical nuclear weapons if they run out of all other alternatives. And what we know from the way he behaves, the way he thinks, the way he speaks, Netanyahu is an advocate of tactical nuclear warfare against Iran. The question is the United States, is the Trump administration, are the Israel firsters around Trump, the Pentagon and the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the CIA and the so-called deep state, are they all in consensus on whether the US wants Israel to use tactical nuclear weapons? I'd say, on balance, the US does not want Israel to try that and is now looking for ways, first, to shorten the war. Let me add a few points about the time there, and that there's not much time. Let's just go to the question of time, if you don't mind, and stop me if I'm wandering away from your question. We know from 2 bits of evidence, the Americans want this war to be over in approximately 2 weeks. Why do we know? Because Trump told Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, to work out yesterday in Paris with the Chinese that he will not be coming to Beijing for a really important summit meeting, March 31st, April 3, because he has to stay home to run the war. This wasn't what the Chinese accepted he would do a few days ago. Remember, last week we talked about the foreign minister of China, Wang Yi, endorsing Trump to show up on March 31st in the middle of a war. We thought that it's disadvantageous, to say the least, from a PR point of view for the Chinese, to be welcoming a war maker at that time. But it's Trump who wants to be in Washington on March 31st. So that's 2 weeks away from today. He thinks he might be needed in Washington to run the war. No, it's to run the negotiations to end the war with a bigger group of advisors than can be fitted into a plane on the way to China or can be securely involved in discussions if Trump is in China. Second, Scott Bessent, in yesterday's interview after meeting with He Lifeng and Li Chenggang, the two Chinese negotiators, gave a very interesting press conference. First, to explain basically that the Chinese and the Americans failed to reach any significant tariff agreements in Paris that they could put on to President Xi and President Trump to agree on in a summit. That's one issue. Second, Bessent, and I'm looking down at my paper to get the text right, Bessent was asked, how much oil is there in supply? How quickly are you prepared to give sanctions waivers to the Russians? What do you see the timing of the oil supply to be? Now, Bessent, it's worth understanding, said some of the obvious arithmetic. 20 million barrels of oil come out of the Hormuz, nothing comes out. A small amount can be diverted by the Saudis to Yanbu and come out the Red Sea. That's if the Gerald Ford can protect the Red Sea, and that's if the Houthis don't begin to close Bab el-Mandab, which they may do if Iran and the Houthis agree on that point. So what Bessent says is, and I'm reading, it looks like the deficit is about 10 or 14 million barrels a day, he means, and that's before any of the ships are coming out of the straits. Then if you think about the Russian oil, he's talking about the floating Russian oil in tanker storage offshore India, offshore China, offshore many places. That's been given a waiver to sell and unload until April 12. That's, said Bessent, between 9 to 11 days to 12 days of supply without the market moving. Then he talks about the additional strategic reserves. What he's talking about, what he's pressed to answer is, how much oil do you think can be supplied to the market before there's a strategic disruption? And therefore, how long can you put up with, can the world put up with the closure of the Hormuz Strait? The assumption there for everybody is that Trump's notion of opening the Hormuz Strait against Iran has failed. It has failed before it started, and it fails without mines. Iran has become the gatekeeper of world global oil supply. This is really important. Gatekeeper, folks. That's the phrase, a word to remember. So Bessent is telling the world, we think we've got about 14 more days of surplus at sea. Beyond that, he knows Russia can produce about 500,000 more barrels a day into the market. A certain amount can come out of Venezuela. But from what Bessent says, he thinks the oil shortage will last only for another 2 weeks. That means he thinks the US will be able to negotiate with Iran terms of end of war, which will reopen Hormuz, which means, to corroborate Trump's travel plan, the Americans think the war will last another 2 weeks. Now, let's suppose that's right. Nobody has to believe me. That's what they say. Let's suppose they're right. If they're right, we now have 2 weeks in which the Americans are looking to negotiate out in order that Hormuz opens. On the other hand, the Israelis want to destroy Iran within 2 weeks, and it can't be done they think, without nuclear weapons. So who is pushing against the American idea of reopening Hormuz, ending the war, by March 31st or thereabouts. Answer, who's pushing against the Americans? It's Netanyahu. Netanyahu. What do the Americans think then? I believe it's reasonable for our audience, for you, for the Iranian side, and for everybody else to figure that Netanyahu makes a very convenient scapegoat for an American negotiated end of war. Why? First of all, he is already the leader of the Israel war faction, and many Jewish communities who oppose the war but remain Jewish want to say that Netanyahu is the rotten apple in the barrel. Let's leave aside that we don't agree with that. That's what they say. We also can pick up, I'm reaching for it, Ayatollah Mojtaba Khamenei's speech. And there are three main points that are, let's call it, end of war terms. One is revenge for Khamenei's death. Well, that point could be met by the removal of Netanyahu, dead or alive, but finished. It's one possibility. Removing Netanyahu would change the Iranian perception. It would change the world's perception. Who could remove him? Only the Israeli military. Only the Israeli military. It would be a military putsch. There has been such a precedent between Pakistan and India when Pakistan was reaching for its nuclear weapons last April. During the Operation Sindoor, which Pakistan lost to India when the war began between the two, Pakistan reached for their nuclears. When India detected that, they multiplied massive air and missile attack, destroying Pakistan's command control, making Pakistan as defenseless as Israel now is. At that point, the Pakistani military, who run the country, telephoned Vice President J.D. Vance and said, we want a ceasefire. That's how the war ended. And the Indian officers who've described what happened, described the relative rationality that they shared with the Pakistani military to avoid the nuclear escalation step. It's happened before, it could happen again, and it meets the Ayatollah's first point. The second point in the Ayatollah's end of war terms is that Iran must have reparations from the enemy, and if the reparations are refused, the Iranian side will destroy the Arabs' property as well as the US bases to an equal value. Plus, there are Iranian reserves, bank reserves, stolen by the English. They're all over the place, and they could be restored. So there is a way of meeting the reparations term. And finally, and this is a crucial difference between Israel and the United States, the Ayatollah said the US bases must be closed immediately. Now, the Iranian side, we know, and your colleagues have done a terrific job of acquainting us with how much destruction, beginning with the losses of the big AN radars in Qatar, Saudi Arabia, if I'm not mistaken, and Jordan, on which all of Israel and US air defense depends. The US could withdraw from the bases and not reconstruct them, at least for a foreseeable future. They don't, in fact, need them. Why don't they need them? For the US can walk away with the idea that it has brought Pakistan and India into a US strategic embrace, and we can come back to where India is in this war, but it's certainly not with Iran. It's against Iran. If the US calculates that its principal enemy is China, and it cannot cope with the unpredictability of tactical nuclear warfare against Iran, which would cause a dead hand retaliation. Israel would be destroyed by the dead hand, automatic retaliation. If the US side decides that at the military level, the CIA level, then it can cope with the loss of bases because it will gain strategic combination against Iran in the West, Afghanistan in the West, and against China in the East. So I can see, and I think we should be anticipating now, that the US can walk away not with Trump's win-win total obliteration of Iran, but win, not win-win, and not obliteration, but without the obliteration of Israel. So that's a theory. It's potentially wrong. However, I'm working from the basis that the US needs and wants a short war and has to come to negotiation with the Iranian side on the Ayatollah's terms, not on Witkoff and Kushner's.
John, you mentioned the Strait of Hormuz. I think one of the main questions, one of the main difficulties that the Trump administration is facing right now is the Strait of Hormuz. How did you find the reactions of the NATO countries? Donald Trump said that NATO without the United States is nothing. Then he comes out and somehow begging them to help him in the Strait of Hormuz. Who are these NATO countries, and how did you find the reaction to Donald Trump's, request?
Well, I think the important point, and you implied it, and our audience understands it, is the Europeans broke into pieces. They see things differently. We know from the reporting, it's a bit less than clear, however, that the French and the Italians have tried to negotiate directly with Iran for exit from Hormuz. Again, this is such a war winner. Iran is now the gatekeeper of the Persian Gulf. Not since Darius, 2,500 years ago, has Iran been so powerful despite its weakness. This is insufferable to the Jewish, Zionist, Israeli war plan, but there it is. So Europe acknowledges Iran as the gatekeeper and tries to negotiate exit. We've seen India, which declared war on Iran in the Knesset when Prime Minister Modi screamed, "Am Yisrael Chai," 48 hours before he knew the war would start. There is a lot we can say that indicates that there are military objections in India to Modi's behavior. And meantime, we can see that Foreign Minister Jaishankar has been busy going to Europe, pleading an Indian role to mediate a settlement between the Europeans and Iranians, as if Iran needs India as an intermediary. So we know that the French and the Italians took the view, we'll negotiate with the gatekeeper. We don't any longer believe the castle can be destroyed. We will go up to the gate and negotiate with the gatekeeper. That's one thing. Merz, the German, the mini chancellor, and Starmer, the mini government leader of the UK, have taken a different line. They're principally concerned with fighting on the war in the Ukraine against Russia. They see their principal enemy to be Russia. They don't want a war that goes on and on, that gives Russia more and more economic leverage through energy supply. So it's unclear to me what, in fact, Merz's policy is towards Iran. But I don't see that he's at all confident of anything with respect to Iran. We've seen the Belgian Prime Minister announce Europe must normalize its relations with Russia because of the current war. So we have a breakup of the NATO countries, reflecting rather well their sensitivity, their political sensitivity, and their political weakness if energy prices shoot up. And basically, Trump's is as sensitive as they are. They are no more sensitive than the US president is. So I think what we can see now happening is a total failure on the part of the Europeans to offer any form of joining the war. They don't want to join the war. The most Starmer can do is plus the French, plus a few Spanish weapons, plus the Greek Navy, plus the Cyprus Navy. They can throw a few things into the defense of the British sovereign base at Akrotiri in Cyprus after 2 hits on the Akrotiri base in Cyprus. This is for show. They all combined and failed, as you know very well, at opening the Red Sea against the Houthis. And the Houthis took terrible punishment during that episode, but they won, establishing themselves as the gatekeeper of Bab el-Mandeb, right? They did. But compared to them, the Iranian achievement's even greater. And I think the answer to your question is NATO and the United States are in the same boat. And that boat is either locked into the Persian Gulf, where it's a sitting duck, or it's locked out where it can't open the energy spigot. And that energy spigot must open, according to Percent, for the market to normalize after 2 weeks.